celebration, and you meet up, you learn how to do the skill, you draft-proof that house, and then you get the gear to go off and do your own house. But what's really great about this, and it's one of the things that we see with lots of transition projects, is because there are now 360 formal transition projects around the country, many, many hundreds of more, what we call mullers, the ones that are mulling whether they're going to become formal ones or not. Actually, it's like each initiative is like a little research and development unit, and it can try things out, and when it comes up with things that are replicable, they can be spread very, very quickly through that network. So this idea of draft busters, very, very simple, but it's being now run in all kinds of, lots and lots of London transition groups are now doing draft busters, and it's a really effective simple activity. And now we leap across to Italy and to a place called Montevideo, which is in Bologna. And this is, I feel a bit like a football. This is the kind of thing at the beginning of football matches that captains hand each other in the Champions League. You know. But this is the pennant for Montevideo. And Montevideo is the first transition initiative in Italy, Transition Montevideo. And they all came together. There were some people there who started doing talks about peak oil and climate change and transition. And then there was a whole group of them who were really inspired by this. And half of them said, we're going to run for the council. And the other half said, no, we don't really want to do all that running for the council stuff. We want to do the on-the-ground community stuff. So the ones who wanted to run for the council ran for the council. And the way they ran for the council was that they just did lots of open space events. And they generated their policy approach from what was coming up in those open space events. And the people who got in to the council then went on to pass the most extraordinary resolution, which if any of you can read Italian, you're welcome to come and read here. But they did send us a translated version of it, and it's really still the exemplar for what a local authority can do if it decides it really wants to support transition. So it talks about resilience and wanting to make the place building localisation, becoming a decarbonised place, but it also has a lovely sentence in it about promoting simple living and frugality. There's not many councils yet here who are quite ready to start talking about that, but that's all in here. And so a lot of transition groups try and work with their local council, and it's a very, very powerful thing when you see that working really well. When the Brixton Pound was launched, the CEO of Lambeth Council said at the launch he wanted the Brixton Pound to become the currency of choice for Brixton, and we need those people on board where we can get them. This is from Totnes, where I'm based. And this is something called Transition Together, which is something that we developed there because it's, when we talk about resilience, it's also really important that we're focused on the nuts and bolts of actually reducing in a measurable way carbon reduction. And so this is a workbook that we developed called Transition Together. And the idea of it is that you get together with 6 or 7 people on your street, you have a group and you meet up a few times, 6 or 7 times, you work your way through the workbook, and it gathers certain data about energy use, water use, and so on. But there are now 500 households in Totnes who've gone through this, and each household reduces its carbon by about 1.5 tons each. But actually, when I meet people in the street who've done this, they don't say, oh, it's great, I did transition streets, I reduced my carbon by 1.5 tons. Actually, what they talk about is, it's great, I did transition streets, I now know Dave down the end of the road, and Sandra on the other side of the road, and we're now doing this, and that bit of ground we all walk past every day, we're finding out whose that is, we want to take that and grow food on it, and it's all those kind of spin-offs that are just fantastic. And so it's been a very, very powerful tool, and we won the Ashton Award for behaviour change with this. It's something that's very replicable. There's another Taunton are doing it, and other places have picked it up and made their own versions of it. But looking at behaviour change from that kind of bottom-up way is really, really powerful, I think. This rather strange object here is from Malvern, and this is the part of the workings of an old Victorian gas lamp. And those of you who've ever been to Malvern, Malvern has 109 old Victorian gas lamps. They're listed, and actually they were the things that inspired C.S. Lewis when he wrote The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, to have that lamp that Lucy sees when she first goes through the wardrobe is based on the ones in Malvern. But they're pretty disastrous from an energy point of view. They use a huge amount of gas, they don't make very much light, they cost the council a fortune to maintain every year. About £450 a year to maintain, and they use about £130 worth of gas each. And most of that light just goes straight up into the sky. So the Transition Malvern Hills Energy Group managed to draw together all the real kind of lamp nerds in the country, it seemed like, and all the kind of real energy geek people in the area, and they set out on a mission to change the lamps. So what they've done is they've come up with a different way of running those lamps, which means that they use 84% less gas. They don't make any light pollution at all the light goes straight down, they're 10 times brighter than they were before. They take a fraction of the maintenance that they did before. They're all maintained by the UK's first fully qualified female gas lamp technician, who maintains them all cycling around with a bicycle and a trailer. And what they're looking at now is whether they could actually set up an anaerobic digestion scheme that would actually produce biogas to run the lamps. So it's about, you start out with a problem, but actually there's all kinds of solutions that can emerge from that. And they call them, they're known locally as the gasketeers. This is in Yorkshire, in Slathwaite in Yorkshire, or Slowett in Yorkshire. And Marsden and Slathwaite Transition Towns, MAST, is a project that is sort of covers the valley where they're based. And when their local shop, the local greengrocer, was going to shut down, they thought, well, maybe we should try and take this over and do a community buyout of the shop. And so they started the Green Valley Grocer. They raised £15,000 through a community share option in about 2 weeks. But what's really interesting about it, again, is it started out as a shop, but all kinds of other things are spinning off of that since. So the thing that they sent me for that was this clove of garlic, because when they started running their own grocers, they obviously wanted it to be something which supported and encouraged the local economy as much as it could. So they got sent. So they found out that when you're a wholesaler running a shop, most of the garlic that is available to you is imported from China. And they thought, this is just stupid. So they started the Slathwaite Garlic Challenge. And everybody who came into the shop got offered cloves of garlic, seed cloves, to take home and grow at home. So their idea was that within 2 years they'd be able to become self-sufficient in garlic, if nothing else, in the area. But what's actually spun out of it, now they've got the shop up and running, is that there's a thing called Edibles, which is a co-op that started up to grow food to supply the shop. They're also starting a wind co-op for the valley. So these things can become a real catalyst. And what was really interesting in doing a book was our starting point was, if we're really serious about making localization happen, then actually we need to start putting these things in place. It's not going to happen otherwise. So we need to start thinking more like social entrepreneurs. We need to start looking at how we can make these things lively and viable. But what was intriguing was to look around and see how much of that was already going on. And this was one really good example. Example was from Devon. This is in Topsham. So Transition Topsham started out, they did the usual things, they showed some films, they did some talks, they revived the wassail in the area, did things like that. And then they sat down and they had a meeting where they said, you know, what is the thing that really unites people in this time? What's the thing that people really focus on and unites them? Is it climate change? I think maybe not. Is it peak oil? Well, no. Could it be beer, do we think? Yes, I think it could be. And so what they did was they started their own brewery. So this is Topsham Ales, and they oh, is that better? Okay. And so they had a group of people who came together and said, yeah, we want to make this happen. And they saw that as being not just a brewery, but the brewery being a way of actually incentivizing all kinds of other things. So again, they did a share option. They raised about £40,000 in a short period of time. The local hotel offered them space in order to do that. And now that's really thriving with all kinds of beers going on. So it's a local, and what they're trying to do is to get to tell the story of the transition of the place through the beers that they brew and what they're called. And one of the things when we're talking about that and about creating these new businesses and this new infrastructure that we need is how do we sort of support people who want to do that, rather than everything having to go to the bank and borrow enormous amounts of money. What other models might there be for how we actually do that and bring that on stream? And this is something called the Handmade Bakery, which is again in Slathwaite in Yorkshire, which was a young couple. They started out, they were very inspired by Andrew Whitley's real bread stuff. They got really into making really good bread. There's absolutely fantastic stuff. And but they didn't have any money. So they started out very small, and they started as a subscription-based bakery. So they had people who paid for their month's worth of bread in advance, and they collected it every weekend. And as that's grown, and they've got these various supporters, they sell through shops and so on, but when they wanted to expand the business, and they needed to borrow money for new premises, about £40,000, rather than going to the bank and paying 7 or 8% interest or whatever, what they did was they went to all the people who were their supporters and said, please lend us money, we'll pay you 7% interest, but we'll pay you the interest in bread, which for them as a business meant that it was about 2%. So that kind of model is really useful, I think. But I think ultimately where we see this going is into much bigger, much more meaningful things. And so this is one of the exciting developments that there's been recently. This is Lewes in Sussex. So Transition Lewes started working with the local brewery, Harvey's, who they'd already been working with on other things. When they launched the Lewis pound currency, the brewery launched a beer called Quids In to celebrate the launch of the Lewis pound. And so this talk isn't entirely about beer, by the way. You might be thinking I've got a bit of an obsession. But I am really quite intrigued by the idea of local breweries sort of documenting the process that the community goes on. But it has a huge roof as well. So they decided, well, why don't we do a community, the UK's first community-owned solar power station. It's 544 PV panels. It's a big, big installation. And they raised £310,000 in about 5 weeks in order to make that happen. And those panels are now in place on the roof. But again, it's a really exciting thing in terms of, well, that stuff needs to be put in place. Well, maybe we could do it and we could own it and it could be run for the community benefit. In Bath, Bath Community Energy is set up now. They're looking at a number of projects, firstly solar PV, then wind and anaerobic digestion. And their mission is, working as something that's spun out of Transition Bath, is to, within 5 years to have £11 million worth of renewables in place in community ownership, which will be generating about 350 grand a year for this process and to support this process in a wide range of ways. So the last one I wanted to show you is, this is from Norwich, and a few places have done this, that actually localization isn't going to happen by accident. It's something that needs to be planned. It's an intentional process, this idea of intentional localization, that we need to come together with the people around us and design this and actually make it happen. And a few places have done a sort of whatever the name of the place is, feed itself kind of studies. There's a Totnes feed itself, there's Kinsale feed itself, there's a few other places have done it. So this is Norwich's one, which was done as part of their Norwich resilience plan. But what they've done is they've sat down, first of all, they looked at all the land around Norwich, how it was currently used, and then they said, well, how could we actually, how much land would we need in order to sustain ourselves? They mapped all that out, and then they said, okay, well, how are we going to make it happen? What are the first things we need in order to start making the steps towards that? So those things were that they needed a mill, because obviously they grow a lot of grain in that area, but there was no mill that was milling that for local consumption. They needed some community-supported agriculture farms. They needed some trials into other things that they could possibly grow for that area, and that's what they've done now. So that idea of localization not happening by accident, but being an intentional process, is something that's really useful as well. So that hopefully might just sort of give you a flavour of some of the things that are actually out there happening on the ground. And as we looked, in the first book, we had what we called the 12 steps of transition, which was from quite early on people coming down to Totnes in Devon and saying, so what are you doing exactly and how does that work? And us not really knowing what we were doing because we were very much making it up as we went along and trying to pin down what some of those things were. But over time it's become clear that actually that's quite redundant as a model because what's happening is much more diverse than that. So in the new book what we're trying to do is to really reflect